Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel, your number one source for income-oriented investing. And today we're going to talk about Bitcoin, but more specifically, how we could get access as income-oriented investors, which is of course what this channel is all about, to the Bitcoin TRIFORCE. This is a term I made up. Okay, I'm a big fan of The Legend of Zelda, was obsessed with it as a kid. I got mad every single Friday when it didn't show up on the TV. I spent hundreds and hundreds of hours playing Ocarina of Time on the Nintendo 64, like I explained in the introduction of the Canadian episode. But I digress. Today we're going to talk about how us income investors can get access to what I feel is the Bitcoin TRIFORCE. 3 exposures, 3 pieces of this Bitcoin TRIFORCE. And this is going to cover the American stock market, the US stock market. I did a previous episode which covers the Canadian market. So let's get to it right away. Bitcoin hitting all-time highs just like the market. My personal opinion, guys, now, this is not financial advice. I'm not a licensed financial advisor. I think Bitcoin exposure should make up a part of your portfolio, just like they say gold should. Well, this is, I think, a better version of gold. Again, my personal opinion. But I'm going to give you some options as an income-oriented investor. And hey, maybe you'll like only one part of the TRIFORCE, maybe 2 out of the 3. It's up to you to decide, really. But I feel there's 3 parts. Let's start with the easiest one. Part 1 of the TRIFORCE, just owning the Bitcoin, right? Very super simple. But of course, I'm more of an old school investor. If you don't want to go get a wallet and buy the Bitcoin yourself, you could invest via an ETF. And of course, the most reliable, well-known, biggest one ever is IBIT from BlackRock. This is just like buying the GLD ETF, guys. You get access to Bitcoin. But of course, we're income-oriented. So let's go through the Bitcoin income-oriented covered call ETFs, options ETFs on the US stock market, which is actually a lot of options, a lot more on the Canadian market. Let's start with the first one that came out, I believe. YBTC, this is from Roundhill. They're basically doing covered calls on Bitcoin ETFs like IBIT. You'll see the IBIT calls right here, actually. The very common strategy, and this is pretty much what almost all of them do in the list of just Bitcoin exposure. They write covered calls. When you're writing covered calls, you want something that's big and liquid, big options market, and nothing's going to beat IBIT. So most of these, the next 4 or 5 ETFs that we're going to talk about, they mostly write covered calls on IBIT, guys. Not very hard to understand. So this one has weekly distributions, very high distributions. Of course, they could vary greatly. You see the last one was very high at 45 cents. But the week before is 31 cents, 27 cents, 20 cents. So it could vary greatly. But if you especially like weekly dividends, getting those weekly distributions every Friday, this is definitely one to consider. BTCI, oh, by the way, 95 basis points for the MER. Is it? Oh, sorry, 96. 96 basis points, sorry. BTCI, expense ratio, 98 basis points. Very, very similar. Covered calls on Bitcoin, about 28%. Dividend rate, but the distributions I believe are a little bit more consistent. Neos is a little bit more consistent. They are monthly, but very, very similar strategy. Biddy is the next one. So Amplify ETFs has 2 of them, Biddy and Baggy. What's the difference? Biddy will not exceed 2% option or 2% yield a month. So with Biddy, you're actually going to get a maximum of 24% annual yield. They're capping it so that you could get more Bitcoin upside if Bitcoin goes up. So if you think Bitcoin is going to go up, you're very bullish on it, and you're okay with 24% yield paid out monthly, this could be one to consider. What's good about this one and even the next one is the expense ratio is much less. Makes sense because Amplify ETFs is very big, right? They have Devo and QDevo and a bunch of other stuff. Baggy is very similar to Biddy, except they write more covered calls. So just like the name says, instead of 2% monthly, it's max income. So it's 30 to 60% yield. So they're simply writing more covered calls than Biddy. That's it. So you're going to get a little bit higher yield. It's typically about 30% yield. But again, these are pretty new. They only came out with 2 distributions, but basically, if maybe you want more covered calls, you want more yield, you're willing to give up a little bit more upside. Baggy is, you could consider it pretty high yield, 30%. But of course, YBTC and BTCI could be, the yields are very similar as well. Last but not least is XBTY. This is a little bit more complicated to understand, but not really. They're doing covered calls, or sorry, not covered calls. I keep saying that for the Granite Shares Yield Boost series. They have a bunch of yield boosts, by the way. They do puts. They do put options, but on leveraged Bitcoin ETFs. So, of course, Bitcoin is fairly volatile. Volatility is going down with time. The more popular and more adaptable it gets, and Michael Saylor predicted Bitcoin volatility will go down and down and down, and it is. So what they're doing, there's Bitcoin leveraged ETFs out there. In the US, they have like 2x, 3x leveraged Bitcoin ETFs. So they're doing the put options on those. That's basically it. So the distribution rate is absolutely obscene here. It's probably going to be the highest out of all of them. And it's a weekly distribution. The fee's not bad. It's 99. What did they actually hold? Can you actually see what they hold? I would love to see what they hold. Yeah, BitX. So they're doing calls, or sorry, I keep saying calls. They're doing puts. You see the P here. They're doing puts on BitX, which I believe is a Granite Share ETF leveraged, right? Leveraged Bitcoin ETF. Let's just double check here. So I was wrong. It's not another Granite Shares ETF, but BitX is from Volatility Shares, and it's basically a 2x Bitcoin strategy. So that is the difference. That's what XBTY is doing. So in terms of performance, by the way, these are all, cover calls on Bitcoin basically, which means you're giving up some upside for those premiums, and each of them have a little bit of a different strategy. I think YBTC, in terms of total return, last I checked, and of course by the time you watch this video it could be different, they're all very similar. The total returns are very, very, very similar, everyone. Again, total return includes the dividends, includes everything. YBTC I think is near the top. Baggy is a close second, I believe. But there's also one called Maxi, which is a bit in a category in its own. So this is the Simplified Bitcoin Strategy Plus Income ETF. They don't actually write covered calls on Bitcoin. They give you Bitcoin exposure with this one, but then they're using the cash to write classic call spreads and put spreads on a bunch of all kinds of stuff, including gold, and the NASDAQ 100, that's what NDX is, NASDAQ 100, GLD is gold, ROOT is the Russell 2000, RUTW, so that's Russell 2000 call spreads, SPX is the S&P 500 call spread. So they're basically doing, they're basically giving you exposure to Bitcoin uncapped, so you're not giving up any upside of Bitcoin, but they're doing stuff within the ETF to give you a little bit of monthly income. Right now, it's at about 13.5% yield, but the monthly income could vary greatly, by the way. Where is the monthly income? Where is it? Unbelievable. Yeah, portfolio hold. Here it is. Recent distributions. Sorry, I know I'm scrolling a lot. The monthly distributions could vary greatly. 35 cents, 50 cents, 30 cents, 10 cents, 15, $2, $1. So it could vary greatly. But you'll get some income without capping your upside for Bitcoin. So out of all of these, of course, Bitcoin has done really, really, really well. So the big winner in terms of total return is Maxi. Maxi just blows all of them away because you're not giving up any Bitcoin upside. So this is a very interesting one to consider. If you like getting a little bit of income, but you really, really, really are bullish on Bitcoin, you don't want covered calls, you don't want to cap your upside, this is a good option. Okay? That's part one done of the TRIFORCE. Part two of the TRIFORCE is Bitcoin-related companies. Companies or stocks in the Bitcoin ecosystem that could benefit from Bitcoin and crypto in general. Let's go over three of them. Maybe there's more now, but you have three income-oriented covered call ones. The first one is SEPI from Rex Shares. This has a distribution rate of 41%, typically 40% yield. It's relatively new, and like it says here, own stocks invested in crypto-related activities, plus write covered call. So when you're owning stocks, there's a little bit more diversification. So if ever you're a bit scared of Bitcoin, you kind of want to get in the game, but you don't really understand it yet, this part of the TRIFORCE could be very interesting to you, because if you look down, you'll see a lot of companies that you'll recognize that will benefit or that are kind of linked to Bitcoin. So it's like an indirect way of investing in Bitcoin. AMD, a lot of tech companies, of course. AMD, MicroStrategy, of course. Coinbase, Marathon, Robinhood, Nvidia, Riot. So you'll have obviously some crypto miners. This is the Coinbase. We know what it is, right? Big crypto exchange. That's legit. Some technology stocks like AMD and Nvidia, etc. So this is kind of like crypto related companies. So if you're ever risk averse, you don't really understand what Bitcoin is, this could be a good option. It's a little bit different way of investing in Bitcoin related stuff, right? Bitcoin related companies. Blocks is another one from X Funds. This has weekly income. This is what sets it apart from SEPI. SEPI is monthly income. Blocks has weekly income. Similar stuff, covered calls on the companies that are related with Bitcoin. Is there a list? The list looks similar to SEPI, Coinbase, Galaxy, Riot, Marathon, Nvidia, MicroStrategy, Block. Very, very similar companies in all three of these ETFs. Last but not least is LFGY, which out of the three, well, Blocks is very new, but LFGY, the one from YieldMax, has the best performance, the best total return. If you compare SEPI with LFGY, last I checked anyway. Same thing, right? This is weekly income, which is cool. Bitcoin related companies. So Coinbase, MicroStrategy, you actually have a bit of physical Bitcoin itself here. They have IBIT, Marathon, Robinhood, Riot, same companies, right? So this is another piece of the Bitcoin TRIFORCE that you could have to get Bitcoin exposure. You have three options in the US. Last but not least, and probably the riskiest one out of the three, but the most fun, and because I'm a big fan of Michael Saylor, is MicroStrategy or strategy stock, right? So in case you didn't know, and by the way, I have this bookmarked, strategy or the MSTR stock, Michael Saylor's company, is basically issuing debt, issuing preferred shares to raise as much capital as possible to buy as much Bitcoin as possible. So an investment in MSTR is kind of like a leveraged investment in Bitcoin. Michael Saylor literally said, investing in MSTR is about 1.5x to 2x leverage Bitcoin. That's what it is. They're actually at over 600,000 Bitcoin. And of course, it's leveraged to Bitcoin, which means the stock MSTR is going to be more volatile than Bitcoin. It's going to be more volatile than IBIT. You see the implied volatility here is 57%. If you actually click on assets, you could see the volatility of a bunch of other stuff. The SPY, gold are typically sit at around, where is the volatility here? Is it here? No, options. Here it is, options. So if you look at the volatility of IBIT of just Bitcoin, it's about 44, but MSTR is about 57. So it's going to be higher volatility than IBIT, which means if you're doing covered call strategy on MSTR instead of IBIT, you're going to get more premium. Hence, all the strategy or MSTR covered call ETFs in the US. In Canada, there's only Harvest, but in the US, there's a bunch of them. Of course, there's the OG MSTY guys from YieldMax, about to cross 6 billion in assets. This one just writes covered calls on MSTR and gives out a very, very high yield monthly, but it varies. It varies monthly based, of course, on the volatility of MSTR. If MSTR becomes less volatile, you're going to get less yield. But MSTY is a great option here if you just want monthly income, lots of covered calls, lots of high yield. If I was American, this is the one I personally would be attracted to, MSII, also from Rex Shares. The reason is very simple, is because they use 25% leverage and they only cover half the portfolio. So if you are more bullish on Bitcoin, on MSTR and Bitcoin, you're probably going to want MSII over MISTI. This one is fairly new. It does have weekly dividends, which is really, really cool. And let's see, you see them here. So, 14 cents, 29, 18, 25, 24. So what kind of yield are we looking at? If we just do, let's just say it's 23 cents times 52, right? Because it's weekly, divided by 28.39, the latest stock price here. You're still looking at a 42% yield. So not as high as Misty, of course, but they're only writing it on half the portfolio, which is why they say balanced growth and income. They're only writing the covered calls on 50% of the portfolio, whereas Misty is writing it on 100% of the portfolio. So there's another option if you want some even more craziness, MST from Defiance. So this is leveraged. Basically, you have 150 to 200% leverage on MSTR, but they're doing covered calls, weekly income, so very, very high yield here. You're going to expect probably higher yield than MSII, but a lot more volatility. This is going to be out of the three, by far the most volatile one. But if you want high yield, you love the high volatility, you're good with that, this could be an option. And there's many, many more, guys. There's one from Bitwise as well. I actually covered a bunch of them. I did a comparison of the MSTR covered call ETFs in the US and even in Canada. You could check out this video if you want. I do a deep dive, a little bit more of a deep dive in these three. But for me, MSTR, covered call strategy on MSTR, income strategy on MSTR is the third piece of the TRIFORCE, right? It's going to be the biggest Bitcoin treasury company. Who knows what they're going to be able to accomplish later on by having such a big chunk of the Bitcoin supply. Remember, Bitcoin supply is capped at 21 million. They can't make any more of it. They already have 600,000 of it, which is absolutely incredible. So just a reminder, if you're American, subscribe to this channel because this is what this channel is all about. It's all about income strategies. And in case you didn't know, I have a monthly series, 2 episodes every month, one that covers the Canadian market, one that covers the American market. So obviously, if you're American, the American market one is good for you, right? Where I go over S&P 500, NASDAQ 100, and now even Bitcoin and Bitcoin-related income-oriented covered call ETFs to keep you updated on the landscape every single month. So make sure you're subscribed and make sure to check out this episode. And by the way, in case you didn't know, my channel, if you click the name of my channel, I have a specific playlist, if you're American, that's called US market only content. So anything I do that covers only that related to the US stock market goes in this playlist. I know I have a lot of Canadian content and the Americans are always complaining. Whereas the American stuff, well, you could just follow this playlist and save this playlist because all the US related stuff will go directly in this playlist. So I hope you learned something from this video, everyone. That is the Bitcoin TRIFORCE, my opinion. 3 great exposures that you could add to your portfolio to get Bitcoin exposure. Again, not financial advice, just for educational purposes to show you and teach you about these ETFs. Hit that like button. I would really appreciate it, and see you next time.